Hi and welcome to the UX Design Prototyping course given by Technical University of Denmark. And here in the third lecture we're going to look at Internet of Things. How do we connect different types of interfaces, services and so on. And you could say we have done that to a certain degree already when we talk about having a watch connected to a smartphone, or we will have a smartphone connected to YouTube, uploading little videos. But if we want a broader sort of framework, we need an open standard. And one of the things here which are really nice is what is called IFTTT, if this then that, which is supported by a lot of different products and services. So one example here could be a BMW. So let's say you are in your car and you close the door. So you park the car, what should it do? And in this case, the car will send an email to you saying, hey, I'm parked here so you can find me again, which is nice. So the BMW here works as a trigger and the action is send a mail. Could also be the other way around, where it says you have a trigger which is looking for a specific type of sports news. Once this arrives, this becomes a trigger and the action becomes the BMW, which is, okay, then we'll display this sports results or something else in the car. And it's not just cars, it could be all sorts of services, it could be light bulbs, it could be heating, it could be washing machines. Very important, it could be your mail, it could be your calendar, it could be any of these connected in various ways, and it's very intriguing what you can do then. So what we're going to use as a case here is the new Oticon Open, which is a hearing aid, but it's also, as it says, the world's first Internet of Things connected device, because it could, for example, talk to the car, or the car could make your hearing aid do something. You could interact with the heating system, the light bulbs, whatever. And in this case, what we talk about here is not just hearing aids, right? We are talking about more or less an auditory interface. How can you create augmented hearing using an in-ear device, which would also work as a hearing aid, but it can stream music, it can do all sorts of things. So just a simple chain of event here could be, once you talk to your system at home, in this case it's a Bang & Olufsen, so it understands what's being said. If you say turn TV on, it will say okay, I'll do that, and it will also have some other IFTTT rules defined. So this means you as a user go in and define these rules. And in this case it says, right, I should turn on the screen, but then I should maybe also dim the lights, I should maybe also change the program, in this case on the hearing aid, so it would communicate with that to change the program to P1 and actually stream the sound directly to the device. So how do you do this? Well, a little example, you can check out the IFTTT app yourself and see how you make what is called recipes, which are these little trigger action pairs. In this case here, for example, I could make Gmail my trigger, so I could say, if I get a mail from this guy, in this case me, with this subject, maybe read this aloud. So you go in, you simply define what is the mail, and when a mail from this guy arrives, it should use the text-to-speech feature on the device to actually read aloud, okay, a mail arrived from this guy, the subject is so and so. And this is important because many of these services can be connected also to cloud things, and this means they can all sort of talk together. And in relation to our second chapter in the UX for Lean Startup book, you know, that chapter, the second chapter, is all about the right research at the right time. And that could be all these different approaches. It could be like just sitting down with people and say, can you in 5 seconds figure out what this is? And people explain what they think it is, and you say, well, okay, fine. Or it could be this sort of guerrilla thing where you go into Starbucks and you try and convince somebody they should look at your app for some minutes and try it out and talk with them. But you could also look at IFTTT, this way of having little apps which could be connected as something which really saves you a lot of time. And you want to do that, and definitely want to cut costs here also. You have to figure out whether this works when you start doing very complex things, as what we're actually starting to talk about now. Can you do this by just using a couple of existing apps, maybe the Uticon Open app, maybe the IFTTT connected with Google Drive, or maybe you could also have people use SMS services or something like this to send messages back, and ideally you would create your own app at some point where all these things were integrated. But before doing that, to keep in the spirit of the second chapter saying the right research at the right time, could you do this with much fewer steps and just try out something? So if I, for example, want to figure out, would people like to change their settings depending on where they are or what they do, that's fairly complex. But I could do that by saying one trigger could be the Google Calendar event, and I just then need to go in and specify specific situations where I would, for example, have a problem. It could be like at lunch where there's a very noisy environment, or maybe it's a meeting where people go blah blah blah. So there are multiple speakers and it's hard to figure out who's talking and what's going on. Maybe then I would need more support from the device, and that means I could change the program. So if I wanted to go in and create this type of logic, I could simply here say, okay, look for this type of event. If this, then change the setting to this program. I could say at the same time, when you do this, also go in and upload this information to Google Drive, because that means if the user, for example, goes in and changes something, then the Uticon app could be the trigger. And it means that the user has changed the settings, and we want this to be written in a row. So it will essentially just create a spreadsheet, and it will have all these parameters that something happened. It could be the Google event. It could also be a location triggered thing, like a geofencing. So we have defined a little area here, and once you move in or out, meaning within this environment you are comfortable with this setting, and maybe that would also change on, well, within that setting until an event happens in the calendar. So you might not move, but then something else might change. So just location and events could in this sense be a way to model your daily life. And this means we could create these little rows of parameters where it would say this thing happened, and there will be a timestamp at this point, because maybe what you want is something which not only depends on the situation you are in or the place, but also maybe you will feel more or less tired during the day. This illustration here is from the Open Product Guide. You can have a look at this. It actually explains what do you do normally as an audiologist when you set the preferences for a user, because you normally ask a number of questions like how would you like the sound to be a little more bright? Do you want it to be a little more full of details versus cutting off some of the noise stuff in the background? So you could look at this as a sort of cost-benefit thing. You could get more support, meaning you could cut more noise away, but then you would also remove things from the environment, right? And maybe that would depend on where you are. It might depend on the time of the day. So instead of having one setting, so what you see here in the product guide is essentially how do you arrive at one setting, which means one profile, which is like a trade-off for how do I normally in a general sense prefer sounds to be, noise to be removed or something like this. But as I just said, this might actually depend on the context. And now, when the thing can talk to the phone, and there is ability to, let's say, change between 4 programs with different preferences, you could change preferences all the time if you wanted to, if it makes sense. And this is the whole thing here. Does that make sense? And we don't want to sit down and code this in order to figure out whether this makes sense. We want to download the On app, we want to download the IFTTT app, then we're going to make little recipes, and then we're going to see, okay, we could actually check this out with people. Do they normally have a need for something like this in a specific context, or when specific events happen? Once you do this, which means that once you also save this data, so remember one of the little triggers here would be the user changes program, or let's say what happened before was because of the location the program was changed, then maybe the user went in and corrected this. All this is written in rows now in a spreadsheet. And this gives us some simple parameters to actually describe human behavior. It would say, based on this thing, which would be an exit, enter thing, which has to do with geolocation, or an event which would be described as a meeting or launch or whatever in the calendar, then what? At this time, which would be yet another parameter as a timestamp, the last parameter would be the actual setting of the device, which might change when the user goes in and corrects some of these things. So you could look at it the way that instead of having a standard way where you would have an audiologist sit down and find the sort of one-size-fits-all parameters for a user, you could give a user 4 different ways of having more or less support, and based on your behavior, based on your cognitive capabilities, you might be more or less tired during the day, and it could also have to do with how much noise have you been exposed to during the day. All these things could change, and this would allow an app to actually learn your behavior, learn your preferences from the feedback, or if you don't react, we could say, okay, then implicitly we think that this works. This setting is good for that. And then we could apply some different machine learning approaches to this data here. So for example, we could work with collaborative filtering. We could figure out, okay, these are the parameters which describe you, other users like you, what would they do? So maybe this would be a way to learn behavior faster by comparing it to the behavior of other people who are similar. It could also be a classification thing where we would go in and try and figure out more or less like in a spam filter, what are the things which characterize something which you don't want. But in this case here, I think maybe what would work would be more like a decision tree, because we have multiple parameters here. We would have something like if the time is this, and then what? And there could be all sorts of combinations here. If the time is this, and I go into a calm place, then no problem. If I go into something which is much more noisy, like I don't know, a lecture hall at DTU or something like this, or if I'm still in the same place, but now the activity changes, what is it that explains my behavior? And decision trees are actually very good at this type of figuring out, okay, what explains most of the variation here is really so and so. So if this parameter, then it's more likely so and so. And then when you come upon a new scenario, you have trained this decision tree, and it will know, okay, now I've never seen this place before, but I know how you behave normally at this time of the day, or in a context like this, which might be described or could be inferred somehow, and therefore my initial settings would be this or that. So you can see you can go the whole way, both from learning what would be the let's say the preferences of a user, and then train to make sure that you could then have the device proactively select the optimal settings continuously while you try and go through your day. So what we want you to do now is we want to say, okay, this, I think you understand now how we could do this using the on app, how we could use the if app to test this. But if you wanted to create an app which incorporated these things, how would that app look? So now we're not talking about, well, you need to run these apps and then we collect the data and so on. We try and say, if we know we can do this, how would we sketch out an app, a single app, which could do these things here? So you want something which has a reasonable UX experience in terms of what are your preferences in different settings, and then what would be real nice is to say, the reason why we talk about the watch is we can use the watch, of course, for both presenting things and for inputting responses. So rather than you picking up the phone out of your pocket and going through a lot of things, maybe we should here again think of how can we capture the preferences once the system is in doubt about something. How do we say hi to the user? Could you just help me with this and that so I could get to learn your preferences? And in the end, we would need something which would be very, very simple for the user to say, I don't like this, I like the other thing better. So maybe something like an A/B test, like when you're getting glasses off. Is this better? Or try again, is this more clear? So if you, let's say, compare pairwise alternatives in terms of how much noise reduction, how much directionality should we help the user with in terms of getting the most out of an audio environment. And this is something which you can clearly sketch out in POP. But I'm using here the Oticon Open as a case for saying a device which can do this and has all these possibilities to connecting and thereby capturing the user behavior and the preferences, what could you do with this? But you could also look at it in a wider sense and saying, we are going to see not just hearing aids like this, we already have seen in the last year, a number of what we call hearables or in-ear devices which actually provide augmented hearing, which means that all of us, even without a hearing loss, would probably prefer in a noisy restaurant or something like this that we could zoom in and out on speech. There's definitely a lot of noise we want to zoom out of normally. So you could imagine all these aspects of being more like an augmented hearing interface. And this is actually what we would like you to try and see. Could you in POP create like an augmented hearing interface which supports these things as I just said? You can select between different settings. You are able to learn from the behavior and thereby also, in the end, we hope, being able to predict what is a user gonna prefer when we get into a new situation, simply based on the data we used so far for training our, in this case, decision tree.